On today's episode of the Meat Medic podcast, I am interviewing the amazing Marty Kendall from optimizingnutrition.com. Now, this episode is absolutely jam packed. The list of talking points that Marty and I kind of basically sent each other was just, it was absolutely massive. We have tried to cram in kind of so much into this episode and still keep it A, to a reasonable length, and B, actually discuss some of the points in detail to actually make it worthwhile. I'm hopefully going to be doing follow-up episodes with Marty because he has got so much amazing things to say. Probably 4 or 5 episodes we could have done. Marty is actually maybe a slightly unusual guest for the show because he's actually not a healthcare practitioner. And I suppose like anyone has his own health story, but it's really actually his wife and his family's health story. Marty's actually an engineer, and he kind of turned his engineering brain to type 1 diabetes really to help his wife. And that really just started his entire journey. And Marty is all about the data, all about the science, all about the analytics, and his work over at optimizingnutrition.com is honestly absolutely amazing. Really, you guys should check him out on social media and should check out his website. Hopefully you guys find this episode interesting. I know I certainly did. I learned a lot from talking to Marty, and there's so much more I have to learn from him. So if you guys would like him to come back on the show, please let me know in the comments. On with the show. Well, thank you, Marty, for joining on the Meat Medic podcast today. And I think I just want to get straight into it, Marty. Why do we need to worry about blood glucose?
Yeah, blood sugar, blood glucose is usually a sign of metabolic dysfunction, diabetes, etc., obesity. But I've become fascinated. I suppose, I've been married to Monica, who's got type 1 diabetes for 20 years, and I've seen the CGM go up and down, and just became fascinated with the concept that we could use glucose as a fuel gauge to guide when and what to eat. So a few years ago, we kicked off data-driven fasting, showing people how to use the simple glucometer, which is a simple little device you can buy at the chemist to test your glucose, to validate your hunger, to decide when and what to eat. So that's been really powerful to guide people, and we've had thousands of people go through that process, and it's proved to be really, really handy.
Yeah, I think I looked at your community the other day. It's got something like 10,000, just over 10,000 members now. It's huge.
Yeah, we just clicked over 10,000 people. So yeah, it was amazing how thrilled people are to use the glucose, and it's just a way of not counting calories. There's so many shortcomings with calorie counting, and people go, oh wow, I can use a bit of a biohacking method to guide my eating and in a way that is they can see why they need to eat, why they need to wait. If your glucose is elevated, no need to eat. You got plenty of fuel on board. It's like, why refill the car when you're driving down the road with a full fuel tank? But once your glucose gets low and you're hungry, it's definitely time to eat. And you can even use your glucose to decide what to eat if your glucose is really low. I know probably most of your audience don't eat carbs, but if your glucose is through the floor, a type 1 diabetic might drop in a little bit of glucose tablets. If you're above your trigger and you're hungry, then your body's just saying, I need protein, I need nutrients without fuel from the fat and carbs. So you prioritize the protein to ensure you lose weight, you drain the excess fuel from your body while retaining your lean mass.
So is using data for glucose? I'm English, so it's data, but I'm in Australia, so it's data.
Tomato.
I've just started saying vitamin, and that kind of freaks out my wife. Not vitamin, and that really freaks out my wife. Data, wherever you are in the world, however you want to say it. The data that we're talking about here is glucose levels, blood sugar.
Yep. Yeah. Which is basically the upstream fuel in your body. Like we see the glucose in our body, but really that's just the icing on the cake, the tip of the iceberg in the fuels in your body that is in your bloodstream. And you've got, a whole lot of glucose in your liver and all this fat in your adipose tissues. So once the glucose, the glycogen in your liver is full and your muscles is full and your body fat, more importantly, is full, that excess energy backs up into your bloodstream. So people with type 2 diabetes, obesity, it's just a sign of energy toxicity. It's not really... Insulin resistance is such a loaded term. But insulin resistance just means your body's having to work really, really hard to hold all that energy back in storage in your body fat and your liver, just because it's got so much excess energy stored in your body.
Yeah. So you're not a fan of insulin resistance, or you just think maybe there's other metrics? So
I just think it's a poorly understood concept. A lot of people from the low carb community focus on insulin as the big boogeyman that we all need to run away from, and carbs raise your insulin the most in the short term because your body's it basically sees this big bolus of energy in your bloodstream and says, I need to raise that insulin to hold back the energy in storage. But fat does a similar sort of thing, but especially body fat. The more body fat you've got on your body, the higher your insulin needs to be. So, I see this in my wife and my son, who are both fairly low carb. 70% of their insulin each day is required just to hold the body in storage. And if they didn't have that insulin, their bodies would disintegrate and all that energy would flow into their bloodstream, uncontrolled diabetic ketoacidosis, which is a very bad thing and a bad place to be. And we can't, unless you're using a pump, you can't turn off your insulin. Unless you've got type 1 diabetes, you can't turn off your insulin by just eating fat and avoiding all carbs, etc. Even avoiding protein is one thing a lot of people try to do I used to think I could turn off my pancreas, but luckily I can't. I can't go into diabelemia and disintegrate into my bloodstream with elevated ketones and glucose and free fatty acids in my bloodstream. It's a very dangerous situation to be at that really high level with no insulin. So the way to attack high insulin is really, it's not insulin toxicity, it's energy toxicity. If you've got too much energy stored in your body, you'll have excess levels of insulin and glucose and everything else. So the way to bring that down is to really drain the excess stored energy in your body, which is just an incremental, slow process of getting your body fat down, and then everything else falls into place. And once your body fat is at a lower level, your blood sugars will be more stable, your insulin will be lower, etc., etc. So I just had a bit of a privileged perspective with two type 1 diabetics in the family to watch their glucose and insulin fluctuating day and night, depending on what they eat, etc., etc.
well, that's of course how you kind of got into all of this work, wasn't it?
Yeah,
With your wife Monica, and of
yeah,
course now your son, I think, as well, isn't it?
yeah. I'm an engineer by training and just got fascinated with the numbers and just realized that diabetes nutrition was just a numbers game and I could add something to the puzzle.
Yeah. For people who heard that word diabelemia and are thinking, what on earth is that? They've glossed over that. Maybe you can explain that for the audience in case they don't know what that term means.
Yeah, it's a fairly bespoke sort of term for type 1 diabetics who can run their glucose high by underdosing insulin, and that can actually help them lose weight, but in a fairly dangerous way with high glucose and high ketones and high free fatty acids. And that's what I think a lot of people in the keto community think they can do by avoiding carbohydrate. But your functioning pancreas doesn't make a mistake. It knows exactly what to do and how to respond to energy. And if you've got energy in your body will release just enough insulin to hold back the energy in storage to keep the glucose and free fatty acids in your blood at a healthy level. And as you build up too much in your body, it just keeps on overflowing back into your bloodstream.
Yeah. So you're saying there, Marty, that you're in your idea, in your mind, it's really energy as opposed to glucose, or are you equating kind of one with the other there?
Well, they come together. You've got two fuel tanks. You've got your liver, your muscle glycogen that gets filled up, and you've got your body fat, which also gets filled. And once both of those exceed your capacity to easily store fuel, like your fuel tanks in your car, maybe a hybrid fuel tank you could consider, or a saturated sponge, you exceed your personal fat threshold. And once your body fat can no longer hold any more energy, it just overflows into your bloodstream. Professor Roy Taylor has done some amazing work into the personal fat threshold and basically found that different people have different levels of fat that they can accumulate before the body fat basically taps out. So, and once your body fat taps out, then it can't just keep holding more energy. So it's really the fuel backs up in your system until it all overflows into your bloodstream as glucose and free fatty acids. We've got two major fuels in our system, which we often demonize one or the other, but it's really a combination of both. It's a total energy system.
I want to go back to how we actually track glucose and the levels in a moment, but I just want to touch on something that you said there, Marty, about what was it that you just said with the
personal fat threshold?
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I just want to touch on something you said there, Marty, with the personal fat threshold. Some people say this is explains everything. This is it. This is the theory. Other people say no, this is not it. There's more to the story. What? Maybe you can explain again to the audience. What is the personal fat threshold? What is this theory? Does it really stand up to scrutiny? Are there some people that it works for, doesn't work for? And is there a way of testing it? And do we need to?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful to understand why we develop diabetes. It's not just a situation of carb intolerance. Diabetes is not carbohydrate intolerance purely. It's a matter of we've built up so much energy in our body fat that then everything, as I said, overflows into our bloodstream. So the excess fuel from the fat and then the carbohydrate just ends up in our bloodstream because our body fat stores have tapped out. They can't take any more. And I suppose where it trips people up is they say, yeah, I'm really skinny and I developed diabetes. There's definitely an autoimmune component to some forms of diabetes, and there's a bit of a blurred line between type 1 and type 2. But I think for most people, it's just an energy toxicity issue that if they can lose body fat, their glucose will come down and the free fatty acids in their blood will come down as well. And yeah, they relieve the energy toxicity. So for most people, I believe it's energy toxicity. Personal fat threshold explains so much, and that's where the root cause is satiety and nutrient density, which we might touch on a bit later.
Yeah, so I mean, in essence, again, if people are just a little bit kind of confused by what we're actually talking about there, in essence, what we're saying is that with a personal fat threshold, it pretty much says, the idea, the theory is that you can build up a certain amount of energy, certain amount of as fat, essentially. That's why we're talking about fat. And then after that, it basically spilled over, into the body. And as you're saying, this energy toxicity. And this may be perhaps in line with things like, protein leverage hypothesis and spillover and all these other kind of things that people talk about. Essentially saying, if you just consume too much energy than your body can deal with, then you're going to put on weight, and then you're going to start to become unhealthy. Well, you'll become unhealthy. So it's different to weight is different to health in this model, isn't it?
Yeah, and different people can hold different levels of energy stored in their body, and like the Tongans and the Islanders can seemingly get quite large. Maoris, Australian Aborigines even can store quite a lot of energy before it tops over into their bloodstream and they become ragingly diabetic, whereas Indians and Southeast Asians seem to have a lower personal fat threshold, whether it be because their genetics, they don't get as large a fat stores, or maybe their muscles aren't as large, their glutes don't tend to be as large, so they don't metabolize the excess energy as well, and hence they have a lower personal fat threshold. So a healthy BMI for a Southeast Asian might be a lot lower than a healthy BMI for a Tongan or an Islander. So yeah, that's the personal fat threshold aspect of it, that different people have a different point at which the fat on their body becomes unhealthy.
Yes, and that's why some people, they're very large, but they seem very healthy. Their bloods are
Yeah,
good, their blood pressure is good, and so on.
yeah,
They
yeah.
potentially have this high personal fat threshold. Other
Mm,
people, as you said, they're Southeast Asians, for example, with a kind of criteria for metabolic syndrome. It's a
mm,
waist circumference of 10 centimeters less than a Caucasian,
mm,
both
mm.
male and female, to account for those kinds of differences.
Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit, if we can, to glucose. I want to go back to the start a little bit. So we're tracking glucose. Are we tracking
Yep.
glucose? Are we tracking insulin? What are we tracking? And how do we track it? Why are we tracking it? What kind of numbers are we actually talking about here? When do people
Yeah.
realize there's a problem?
There's different ways of measuring different things that people measure when they go to the doctor. Like you might measure fasting glucose, fasting insulin in the morning, and that's sort of an indication, like we said, that you've got excess energy if it's high spilling over into your bloodstream. So when you're not eating anything, when you're just at rest overnight, you've got too much energy from that pressure built up in your fat stores in your liver overflowing into your bloodstream. So you've just got energy toxicity, you've got too much energy. And a high elevated glucose after you eat can also be an indication that you've got some sort of insulin resistance. Basically, when you eat, the energy doesn't go easily into your fat stores and into your liver. Like the sponge is already full, so it backs up into your bloodstream. So just the way we do it in our data-driven fasting challenges is just using a simple glucometer. My wife and my son use a CGM, which is great for people with type 1 diabetes and people who need to know their moment-to-moment trends in glucose, and they need to dose insulin for it. And a lot of people find CGMs really handy to see those trends and go, wow, I shouldn't have eaten that. But what we're trying to do in our data-driven fasting is just to validate your hunger, to just say, hey, I feel hungry. Do I feel hungry enough to test my glucose? Is it below what's normal for me? If yes, let's eat. If no, then maybe if I'm really hungry, I still got to eat, but I'm going to prioritize protein and nutrients with less energy from fat and carbs.
So a CGM is a continuous glucose monitor for anyone
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not sure,
which
they've
is
heard
like
that term.
about $110 per sensor for 10 days, and a transmitter is a couple $100 if you're paying full price. So you can buy it in Australia, but it's really expensive, so most people
Yeah.
don't. In America, you need a prescription. You can get a
Yes.
prescription for them, but yeah, the
Yeah.
simple glucometer is a whole lot simpler and cheaper.
Yes, and I learned something from you. Just speaking of glucometers, I learned something from you at Emma Martin's Lazy Keto Mum. Shout out to you, Emma. I know you listen to the podcast.
Yep,
Lazy
good to meet.
Keto Mum's Keto Retreat. I saw you there, and you were talking about how you tell patients to check their blood sugar. Can you just explain why this is a better way of doing it?
Oh, where I test my glucose?
Yes, where on
Yeah,
your
I mean,
body?
everybody tests on their fingers and they go, "Oh, my fingers are sore," and I'm using my fingers. The fingers are the most sensitive part of your body. I just do a little finger prick on the middle of my forearm, and everybody in my family does it that way. And if that's where you usually do it, then your glucose trigger is calibrated for that, and it's completely painless. So people
Yeah.
freak out about, "Oh, I don't want to draw blood; it's going to be painful." But it's like, you don't feel it.
Yes,
It's
I did.
and once people start testing, they do it. They
Yes.
can't stop doing it because they're fascinated by it. Once they go over the initial, I'm freaking out by drawing my own blood. Once they do it a couple of times, they go, "Oh, it's not really that hard. I was such a wuss."
No, I did this for a patient the other day. I said that
Oh,
you
really?
suggested doing it on the forearm, on like the back side of the forearm, because the front side is quite sensitive.
Yeah.
And they were doing like, are you really a doctor? They were so freaked out, and they were just like, oh my god, it like didn't even hurt.
Yeah,
Because they're
yeah,
like
it's
this,
really
their fingers are
painless.
just gone like so numb and just painful
Yeah,
from all of these finger
yeah,
pricks that they've been
yeah,
doing. So, cool. Okay, you mentioned there, Marty, that it's kind of how much the glucose goes up is what we're
yep.
looking at. Is it how much the glucose goes up, or is it how long it stays up for,
Yeah, I mean, if your
or is it
audience is
both?
predominantly carnivore, um, there's a lot of argument about this, and a potato or fruit or something will spiky glucose and it'll come back down quickly. A low carb meal will have a smaller, longer rise. The fat and carb combo, which is really the enemy in our food system, the pizza, the pasta, the cookies, the croissants, the donuts, all those foods that we just can't stop eating, are this combination of fat and carbs that will raise your glucose and insulin for a very long time. And they may not raise your glucose as much as the apple or the potato, but it'll keep it elevated for a very long time. And when I watch my wife and son's glucose and insulin, the little insulin, closed loop insulin pump is just pumping out insulin for days, big pasta carbonara meal or a pizza or something like that. It's 18 hours, 36 hours
Really?
before it
Wow.
stops just churning out the insulin to try and get the glucose back down. So that's what we're trying to avoid. And quite quickly people identify the meals that raise their glucose significantly. And we just want to keep people under a rise of 1.6 millimole or 30 milligrams per deciliter in American. And once they get off that roller coaster, the roller coaster is bad because when you come crashing down, you feel hungry again sooner and you make poorer food choices. So that roller coaster sucks, and that's the main benefit of going low carb. But once you've got over that, the next thing is, what's my glucose before I eat? Am I depleting the excess energy in my fuel tanks? And once your glucose is a little bit lower than what's normal for you, you're depleting the excess fuel and you're losing body fat, lowering your insulin. Ketones might be going up, but who really cares? Ketones are what ketones need to be. And if you can then eat quality food, get the protein and nutrients when you eat, you're going to be preserving your lean muscle mass and managing hunger with greater satiety.
So is it time under the curve then that's really the most important thing?
It's the area under the curve, insulin and glucose response. So something that raises your glucose and keeps it elevated for a very long time is really what you want to avoid. And a protein-focused meal will tend to often, especially earlier in the morning, drop your glucose. So people see a dawn phenomenon. Their glucose will be a little bit higher first up. They'll have a protein-focused meal when they first feel hungry, and their glucose will drop, which is cool. When I'm hungry again, I can eat again. Life is good. I'm not on this glucose roller coaster.
Yes.
Yeah.
The title of this episode is data-driven fasting. So let's
Cool.
let's talk about the fasting, because we've been 20 minutes now talking about the data or the data, wherever you are in the world. What about the fasting? Where does that come into all of this?
Yeah, we called it data-driven fasting, this process of using your glucose as a fuel gauge, because I saw so many people thinking more is better, longer is better. I'm just going to, not eat for a day or two, and I fasted for 7 days, and it was great. But then at the end of the 7 days, you give yourself leeway to eat anything and everything. So it just seemed that there were a lot of people trying to fast for a long time and saying it doesn't matter what I eat when I eat again. And when you're that hungry, you're just amnesic and you're just going to, binge anything and everything you can find. And because you've learnt to push through your hunger signals, ignore your hunger signals, your satiety signals are completely out the window as well. So we really called it data-driven fasting to, attract people who are into fasting, to try and help them not push so long that they could still eat well, they could still make progress in a consistent way, rather than not eating for 7 days and then having 3 days of binging. And there's just so many people that we saw were pushing it too hard for too long and then completely losing touch with their satiety signals, losing lean mass, which is critically important, really hard to build back up as you age, especially.
Yeah. So you're not kind of suggesting doing, super long fasting. What you really sounds like what you're saying is actually guiding the length of the fasting or the duration of the fasting by what that glucose in this instance is actually telling the body.
And most people in our programs end up eating 2 or 3 times a day. So rather than eating for days at a time or trying to compress everything into 4 hours, or if that doesn't work, you're compressing into 2 hours and then 1 hour, which is just this all-you-can-eat buffet of jamming everything into your mouth because you're so damn hungry. It's
Yes.
like, when do I need to eat based on my hunger and my glucose, and when do I need to eat again? And it just gives you 2 or 3 well-spaced meals that you
Yeah.
can eat like an adult, and you're not eating really poor, energy dense, nutrient poor, low satiety food choices when you do eat.
And presumably people will learn over time, what
Mm,
those kind of body signals are.
yeah.
They're not going to need to keep testing every 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day for the rest of their life.
No, no, and that's the idea. It's like a training wheel. It's using training wheels, a data-driven calibration of your hunger, and people quickly become able to guess their glucose fairly accurately based on their signals of hunger. But you don't learn that unless you're actually paying attention to it and going, okay, I'm going to calibrate, I'm going to validate my hunger using my glucose. And you've actually learnt what true hunger is. A lot of people don't understand hunger because they're always eating, or they've tried to fast and they've ignored their hunger signals, whether that be by calorie tracking and just, I'm going to eat to this, 1800 calories a day and that's what I need to eat up to, or restrict myself to, or extended fasting, where they also ignore their true hunger signals, and just ignore them because they're bad and you don't need them. But hunger is critical, and you can learn a lot with your glucose, calibrating your hunger signals, and eventually you learn, hey, I feel like this, I feel like I need this, I just worked out, so I probably need more energy and protein to recover, or I'm not active today and my hunger is different, I'm going to eat differently today. So yeah, it's just a really powerful tool, and simple and cheap too.
Yeah. And is hunger then, that's a great segue into what hunger really is. Is hunger
Yeah.
calories? Is it energy? Or is it
Yep.
nutrition? Or is it some sort of mixture of both?
Yeah, really all of the above. You're craving energy and nutrients. You need enough protein, you need enough minerals, you need enough vitamins, and you need enough energy. And our modern food system has diluted nutrients with excess energy from refined seed oils, which everybody in the carnivore community is talking about, quite rightly so, sugar and refined starch. So they're the really cheap ingredients in our food system. We've engineered our food system to make us eat and buy more of those foods, so we just end up overeating because our food system is dilute of nutrients that we crave. So you know what you eat is arguably even more important than when and how much you eat. Because if you can nail what you eat to promote satiety, get the protein, minerals, vitamins you need, your appetite's going to be satisfied, and maybe you'll crave a little bit of energy. That's fine. You need that energy because you just did the deadlifts, but you won't always be incessantly addicted to food. I mean, food addiction is just, I'm nutrient poor. I'm not getting the nutrients I need to satisfy my cravings, and always consumed with food and thoughts of food.
Yes, I mean, I certainly do feel that that's at least in very large part of food addiction is actually nutrient scarcity,
Mm,
not energy scarcity, is nutrient scarcity. And of course, we
mm,
have to admit, of course, that you referenced it earlier. There's what we call bliss point to food is engineered to be
mm.
as maximally addictive as possible. I mean, the old
Yeah,
Pringles advert, "Once you pop, you can't stop."
yeah,
I always
yeah.
mention that just celebrating addiction, quite literally and
Yep.
selling addiction to people,
And our
and
food has
people
been
bought it.
engineered to make us addicted to it, and we love these foods. And like
Yes.
Michael Pollan, I think it was, no, Michael Moss talked about the bliss point, which goes back to the 60s when they worked out there was a perfect amount of fat, sugar, and salt that you could put into foods, but to make us eat more of them. But our analysis recently, I'm just diving into 620,000 days of data from all over the world, having a ton of fun. This is the thing I do that I get completely obsessed by. But there's this perfect amount of salt at 2.9 grams per 2,000 calories that we work to get to that. But once we get more than that, where things taste too salty, there's 12.5 percent protein that we crave protein. But once we get more protein than 12.5%, we're satiated. We don't crave any more food. So if you dial yourself up from 15 to 20 to 25 to 30% protein by dialing back fat and carbs, you're going to be more satiated per calorie. And you see the same bliss point trend in all the minerals and vitamins. So it just seems that modern ultra processed food is just, whether they understand what I understand, but if I was trying to make a multinational, I had no qualms about making the entire world obese and just wanted to make a lot of money, I'd design foods that hit these bliss points for protein, minerals, and vitamins, particularly sodium, protein, fat, carbs. I've pinpointed the exact amount, and the way to alleviate that craving is just to move away from it and ideally pack in more nutrients per calorie. So once you've got the protein you need, are you getting enough sodium? Are you getting enough calcium? Potassium's a major one that just is not supplemented, is not fortified, has declined in our food system because we're just growing food quicker with fossil fuel fertilizers, making everything grow quicker, more energy, less nutrients, particularly potassium.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating when I sometimes have, if I'm really hungry, sometimes I can, finish off a 1.5 kilo T-bone, tomahawk steak, sorry, and I'm still hungry. I could still eat. I'm physically full. I'm bursting, like Monsieur Crusoe from the Monty Python. And but my brain is kind of saying, but Monsieur, it's only a wafer thin, and my brain is kind of like, come on, just please keep eating. You're still hungry. But if I have like a spoon of liver pate, for example, not every time, for example, but sometimes I'm desperately hungry and I eat a spoon of liver pate and it's just gone, just totally gone, or maybe even a spoon of honey, and that's probably not nutrition. It's probably the actual just have some energy or something my body wanted at that point.
A little bit of glucose and save your body.
Exactly, it didn't really need
producing it.
Exactly. It didn't need the nutrition. It just needed the energy at that point. The liver probably needed the nutrition, not the energy. And I said this to someone the other day. I've kind of started almost eating like my 8-month-old son. He's 9 months actually today, which sounds really weird. Like I'm eating like a baby. But what I mean is he's really fascinating to watch. And I think he's really putting all of what we're talking about here into actual context. He eats when he's hungry. He doesn't eat when he's not. And, if we put like a bowl of yogurt in front of him, he'll eat maybe half of it and then he'll be crying and he's unhappy. He loved the yogurt. He devoured it, but then he's just done. And then he wants maybe some fruit and then he's done. And he doesn't finish off the blueberries or the strawberries. He just has a few of them and then he wants the meat and then he wants the whatever else, the milk or the banana or something else. And he just kind of cycles between what he's actually eating. And if we actually just give him what he wants, he's just totally happy. We don't give him Coke and obviously like junk food.
As long as
it's all proper food. But it's really fascinating. Yeah, he's basically just the absolute epitome of just listening to his body and saying, right, I'm done with that piece of food now. Now I'm onto that one. And if you try and feed me more of that I'm done with, I'm going to say no and I'm going to kick up a fuss.
Yeah.
Which is
you heard about Clara Davis?
No.
Clara Davis was a interesting nutritionist, and I think it was 1940s. She got a bunch of orphans, newly weaned orphans, and some of them had vitamin D deficiency, rickets, and she just put like 20 different weird foods of meat and cod liver and all these different foods, and each newly weaned infant would gravitate to different foods each day and eat them with their hands, and the kid with the rickets would eat the cod liver until the vitamin D deficiency was fixed, and he was never interested in the cod liver again. But these kids are eating these weird and wonderful foods, knowing exactly what they need. And I suppose my quest is to understand how to do that numerically, because we're all in this food, Willy Wonka's factory where we're surrounded by all this amazing food that's designed to make us overeat, so we can use numbers to reverse engineer that. And then once you've, again, with the training wheels, you show your body what it needs and what it's satisfied with, and then the cravings are over and you're not attracted to the Pringles anymore, which is what we know is all going to make us obese and diabetic.
Absolutely. No, I mean, obviously, people listening to this, they're probably going to know what fasting is, I imagine. And but is there? You touched on it earlier, but is there an upper limit of, how long is actually useful to do fasting for, or is there any danger time for fasting?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people fast for autophagy, which is this mythical term that's really hard to measure that may or may not be a thing, but you may look healthy, your bloods may look fantastic at the end of 2 weeks of not eating, but as soon as you eat whatever you're going to eat when you're that hungry afterwards, they're going to be eradicated. So not a massive fan of extended fasting for autophagy. But really the major issue we see is just loss of lean mass. If you're not, you still need the protein and nutrients every day, no matter how long you don't eat. So if you don't eat for 2 days, you need to make up for them on the third day to get the protein and nutrients you need. So really it's, why don't you eat a couple of times a day, skip the snacks. The glucose pretty quickly shows you which snacks you need to skip, and you're still going to get your protein and nutrients. So really, if you've fasted however long that is, so long that you're making poorer food choices, you're feeling guilty because you're going for the nuts and the comfort foods that intuitively are going to make you overeat them, that you can't stop. You've probably taken it too long. So let's find that perfect point where you need to eat, but you're not so hungry that you're overeating is the major thing for us. We just want to find that perfect sweet spot where you're hungry, but not so hungry you're going to binge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point. I mean, my experience of fasting, I have done 14-day fasts before. Well, just one. Never again. It was a very interesting experiment. I said I did a 7-day fast, and that was actually quite easy, which was very interesting. And then I did maybe, I don't know, a month or two later, I think I did a 14-day fast. And I said to my wife, I said, look, if I get really sick, call me an ambulance. But otherwise, I said, if I did my bloods, I monitored myself. I did my bloods, and I think
Doctor
that's really
supervision.
important. Yes, it's very important for a long fast, particularly. Not medical advice to do 14-day fasts. There is a danger called refeeding syndrome. You guys can look that up. I've done episodes on that. But yeah, by day 7, I was like, the first time I did it, I was pretty chill actually by day 7. And by day 7, the second time, I was struggling. I was fighting my body. And by day 10, I could have probably killed someone. Yeah, for food. Like, I could have just got into a field and ate a cow raw, I was desperate for food.
Wow.
And I carried on stupidly, just, for my YouTube channel, as you do. But by day 14, I felt really, really bad. And it's very interesting now. I mean, I actually was going to fast for today, not because we're doing this episode, just because I wanted to be fasting. But this morning I just woke up, I was just absolutely famished. Like, my body was just telling me I desperately
need to eat
food.
Yeah.
And I just had a wide spread of food. My body was saying, right, just have a bit of everything, that's kind of what it was saying to me. And now that was at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't even a big dish. It was a pretty small dish, probably like 500-600 calories, and I'm just not even hungry anymore. It's just kind of
minerals become really important at that point, not just protein, but after you haven't eaten for a few days. Getting the electrolytes becomes quite critical, and you can fast for longer if you're getting the potassium and sodium and magnesium that you need, that you're not getting electrolyte imbalance.
I think so. And I've been getting a couple of cramps, and I've got, some salt and apple cider vinegar in here. Apple cider vinegar is quite good for potassium, a little bit of potassium, not huge, but well, that's maybe a good segue into our kind of maybe final discussion point, Marty. I'm conscious of time. Nutrition or nutrients versus, or whole food versus supplements.
Whole foods all the way. Whole foods, you've got the nutrients you need in the forms and ratios your body understands. And I think going back to the big food engineered approach, I think looking into the data more, I can see that your Cocoa Pops and Nutri-Grain and Wheaties are not fortified necessarily for your benefit. It's probably just enough to make you keep on chowing down on those nutrient poor, low satiety foods, that you don't go, I need the meat, I need the seafood, I need the veggies that actually contain those critical nutrients by default. Buy food, whether you're carnivore or omnivore or whatever, that tastes amazing because it contains the nutrients you actually need from your body. And the fortification, our diet is replete with fortification and supplementation of minerals and a bit of iron, but we don't get the potassium and calcium and protein particularly that has really declined in our food system. So they seem to be the big ones that show up in our satiety vectors now that we're craving. We're not allowed to fortify with potassium, and it'd taste awful, and it'd be a lot of powder to get that much potassium, and we're really we're really depleted of potassium particularly, and we're probably overeating sodium and craving high sodium foods as a stopgap. So definitely get nutrients. You can track your nutrients and understand which ones you need. Different people have got different nutrients that they need to prioritize, that they're craving more. Everybody's got a unique nutritional fingerprint, which is completely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I would always tell people, to preference, whole food. I can't remember the exact numbers, but multivitamins got something like 15, minerals and supplements in minerals, vitamins, etc. Beef has got something like 300,000, if I recall. It's like, okay, it's really no comparison.
And you're never going to get the minerals particularly that you need, because they're big. Minerals are big, and they come in your food. You can't get it in a multivitamin. And if you're going to be taking magnesium and potassium, I have a LMNT type drink that I make, which has got sodium, potassium, magnesium in it, and it's a lot of powder. Like, to get that much, it's a lot of powder. So.
What do you use for the potassium? Because I use not baking powder. What is it?
Baking soda.
I can't remember now. No, not baking soda. Oh, I've forgotten what it is now. What do you use for the potassium in your drink?
Potassium citrate now. Potassium citrate powder. Yeah. No, I've got a recipe that I use, but definitely don't rely on supplements necessarily for your nutrition. Definitely, it can be useful, but whole food first.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, is there anything else you want to be talking about today? I haven't really given you that much chance to talk about your membership program over at Datadriven Fasting. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. OptimumNutrition.com, isn't it, your website?
Yeah. I've got a blog that I started 8 years ago or so, and just started blogging and fell into a rabbit hole of lots of questions at Optimizing Nutrition. And we've got a community, which is the coolest thing at the moment. In Marty Networks, we got off Facebook and moved it into our own private community, where we've got these amazing people who are psyched about using their blood sugar to guide their eating and optimizing satiety and nutrient density. So it's just this really amazing community that I love, of really amazing people who are really supporting other people to achieve better nutrition, rather than all the criticism and cynicism you get on Twitter and Facebook, and everybody's just going, "Oh, I don't like it. It's doesn't align with my beliefs." All these people are just all in for helping each other to help to improve the nutrition.
That's it. I mean, I signed up for. I didn't pay for the subscription, but I got the free version. And it's a very active, community, and you've got loads of like free books and stuff on there as well. I mean, I'm very impressed how much kind of information you're giving away for
meal
free.
Plans and I want people to try this and experience it, and feel the benefit of getting nutrition. Good nutrition.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's maybe a good time to end our conversation today, Marty. Thank you so much for coming on to the Meat Medic podcast today. Everyone, make sure you can check out Marty on his socials and OptimumNutrition.com for his information. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Suresh. See you, mate.